Hey everybody, so my name is Graham Gaines. I'm with South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. I'm a living marine resource specialist. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about NIMBY, not my backyard. We have three panel members here, each with a very separate take on NIMBY. And I think for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to broaden NIMBY out to mean any individual or entity that's just maybe resistant to further oyster growth in the industry for any purpose. And we'll see a lot of different geographic regions have their own reasons for NIMBY activism. And so I think these three panelists will provide three different perspectives. We have Bill Norman is with Wilmington University. He's a professor with their Department of Parks, Rec, and Tourism. All right.
Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management.
And he has been engaged as the PI for a Sea Grant funded project looking at the social carrying capacity of the oyster industry. So determining what are people willing to take, up to what point. And we also have Frank Roberts with Ladies on Oysters to discuss maybe trends in NIMBYism in South Carolina and the maybe general East Coast of the United States. And we also have Scott Maurer with Louisiana Oysters, who's going to discuss it from a Gulf Coast perspective, where there might be different attitudes or different folks on the other side of the line. So I'll turn it to you, Bill, to address your study.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Bill Martin. I'm a professor of travel and tourism at Clemson University. And about 15 years ago, I was studying different travel and tourism marketing niches across South Carolina, and we stumbled into the culinary niche, one of the popular reasons why people travel. And we ended up on the coast studying shrimp and the role of shrimp in the industry, the folks that come down into Charleston and Beaufort, these places to eat South Carolina shrimp. And we got into this from this really fun Pollyanna approach to it. It's like everybody loves to eat seafood, they come there, and my job was to connect this seafood industry, in this case it was the shrimp industry, with the tourism industry. And it was really fun, and we enjoyed that, and you can see some of the images that I just pulled off the internet. I think they were talking about shucking and trucking and things like that now, and the role of festivals and events. And then from there, we started to see the change in the seafood industry in South Carolina from hunting and gathering to more farming and mariculture and aquaculture. And we got involved in a second project that was funded by NOAA. And then we looked at the role of mariculture and tourism and aquaculture with respect in Florida and South Carolina. And things were very interesting because we found out folks didn't really know a lot about it. But one of the things that did show up was this concern that there was potentially some of this NIMBY, some of these folks were concerned about what's happening in my backyard. And a lot of this came from working with Julie Davis, our extension specialist at the time, secret extension specialist. And she was right, because since then, we now have some things happening in our region. She sort of predicted this, and we've seen this with people being concerned about what's going on in the creeks and waterways in the low country of South Carolina, and concerned about the growth of the industry, and people challenging us that we need to take a look at where we're headed with this. Fortunately, while this is happening, we had already gotten another project funded by the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium, and we're looking at the social carrying capacity of mariculture. And we got into this because my colleague, Jeff Halo, is a park and recreation researcher, and he's been studying this concept of social carrying capacity only with respect to recreational settings. At what point do too many recreationists start detracting from your experience? And he studies people at waterfalls, in park settings, in different types of environmental settings. And we literally pitched the idea to Julie that maybe we could apply these same concepts of social carrying capacity, but instead of measuring at what point do we reach those limits with, instead of people that detract from the experience, with the number of cages and the role of mariculture experiences. So we've undertook a two-part project. Phase one was, let's go find out what people have to say about mariculture. And we conducted 80 interviews, qualitative interviews, around Beaufort and the Charleston area. We talked to politicians, tourists, residents, landowners, people using the waterways, to get their sense of what's going on with respect to mariculture. And we found out, like a lot of research that I was just out at Aquaculture America, a lot of folks not a lot of knowledge about it. And we saw some folks that did complain. They said, oh, the tourists would hate it. And other people said the tourists would love it. Other folks were saying the major concerns were it might block people's access to waterways. Some were concerned about the aesthetic value, which is sort of the classic NIMBY concern. From that research, we have since analyzed that. We are now in the process of conducting a true social carrying capacity study. And what we've done is that what we do is you create images of what people may or may not like with respect to maricultural settings. And we found from our first research that seeing the oyster farms from bridges was a concern. How far they are from the shoreline, what's behind them in the shoreline. So we're this summer, or the spring and summer, we'll be conducting research that looks at what is that threshold? How many cages do they see before it detracts from their experience? And we have different varieties of scenarios. Are they near bridges? Are they near property? What's behind them? And from that, we will create, and I'll just show you what it looks like. That, with respect to mariculture, we'll find out what's that point where the threshold where it detracts from the experience. I just got back from Aquaculture America, and I was generally freaked out because this issue is occurring all across the country. I think they said in California they haven't had a lease in 20 years it's been approved. And part of my concern is that it's the landowners. And I asked Jeff when I got back, I said, are we going to be talking to enough landowners? And we'll do our best. But the thing about the social carrying capacity is that we also talk to lots of other stakeholders. And other stakeholders will be completing this survey instrument that will allow us to find that point and that type of scenario that is sort of the acceptable level of mariculture growth, oyster farming. So I know a lot of you folks are dealing in different states are dealing with siting information. A lot of it has to do with sort of environmental qualities. This adds a social dimension to that siting, and it talks about how to be a good neighbor. It also talks about how to address the different concerns with respect to NIMBYs. So at the symposium next year, we'll present the results of the social carrying capacity. So that's the academic world, and now you'll hear the real world.
Thanks, Bill. As an extension agent, I'm really looking forward to having those results, because we have to have objective information to understand how to proceed with this. Fortunately, a lot of the science, I mean, unlike most other marine industries, a lot of the science is behind the growth of the oyster industry, and so it just makes the case for more science to be pushed and published and engaging the communities to understand that science. So looking at South Carolina, Frank, maybe you can talk about just general trend of the public's perception of the oyster industry, and maybe what are the current major obstacles and what types of solutions are being tried.
Good afternoon, y'all. I'm Frank Roberts from Beaufort, South Carolina. We have the oldest floating farm in South Carolina. It's also the largest floating farm in South Carolina. I started this a long time ago. We're fortunate in my site. And the best way to deal with the NIMBY is not have to deal with it. And you site, you survey your sites. Hopefully you have 3 or 4 sites in case you do run into the NIMBY. Or someone who is skeptical, educate them. You have to come with a portfolio and speak to these people face to face, not by letters. No one likes receiving a registered letter from the U.S. Army Corps saying there's a construction project taking place in their viewscape, because that's what they get. But if you've already been to their house, spoken to them, hopefully they like oysters, and you all sat at the table and ate some oysters. They get the letter and say, oh yeah, that's Joe's project. So if you can figure that out, a site that does not have those issues, then the NIMBYs doesn't even exist. But if it does pop up, and you have to have a public hearing, you have to come armed with factual information. Like they discussed, our industry is restorative. In South Carolina, the wild stock is under pressure. Recreational fishermen need that wild resource to hold bait fish so they can catch the predator fish, which is millions upon millions of dollars in South Carolina for our coastal revenue. So you have to tell the whole story, that you're not some industrial site, you're not driving a 40-foot barge with a 671 diesel engine and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, that you're using small boats with quiet engines, you're in, you're out, you're respectful, and you keep in contact with these people. You build a relationship. And if you can get that relationship done, your permitting process will fly. In South Carolina, the only real issue is NIMBYs. Obviously, you've got your permitting constraints that you have to follow, but the thing that can shoot you right in the foot is I don't want to see it. But an educated person can become a pretty reasonable person. I'm in a rural area. It's ag, and the ag farms in our area aren't doing so hot. So the farmers see this as a jobs, revenue, and carrying on the culture of Beaufort, South Carolina. It's got an oyster culture that goes back over 300 years. And so we frame it in that context, and the reception from the public has been really good. Charleston is a different animal. It's a different dynamic. We talked about carrying capacity. Now, I'm a resident. I go to a waterfall, that was one of your pictures. If I see 3 people there, I'm like, there's too many people. But if I'm a tourist in New York City and I see 3 people, I'm saying, what's up? There's not enough people. So it's the perception of what you're used to living with. And when the NIMBYs that showed up in Beaufort, for example, were Yankees that moved down here and bought the 23-foot center console, and they want to race around and catch every redfish, newly retired. And then they say, well, what's all that stuff I was just driving by? I said, well, that's Frank's farm. He's been there for quite a while. Good fishing there, too. And then the alarm goes away. So you have to be proactive. You don't want to have to be putting out fires. Know your legislators. Because the first thing the NIMBYs do is they call the county council. They call the state legislators. They call everybody sounding the alarm. Now with social media, they hit the media with pictures and whatever. So if your legislators are educated to the facts, restorative, carrying on a traditional history, jobs, environmentally, really powerful. All the politicians love the environmental stuff. So when this person calls up and complains, they can say, oh yeah, my staff will talk to you and they will fill you in on what's going on. And that can alleviate some of the issues. It's a lot of work. You have to go visit the politicians. We were visiting the governor of South Carolina just last week on this very subject. And smoothing feathers for people that don't want it. And there's some places you can't do it. They just don't want to see it. And they'll make your life miserable. The other side is if you take someone and get them to go from NIMBY to support, now you have eyes on your farm, other than your own. My farms, I know everybody, and they watch out for my farm. So, real basic common sense approach. You have to be willing to speak to you.
And I think the sense of community is really important, especially in a place like South Carolina. There's when people understand that your industry or your company is going to have some kind of positive impact, environmentally or economically, they're willing to work with you. South Carolina kind of suffers from, not suffers, but they have an influx of people migrating from northern states, and so the sense of community might get a little bit lost, and that creates a little bit of contention, I think. The Gulf is quite a bit different in the sense that maybe the folks that are more resistant to oyster industry growth might come from those sectors of industry. But Scott, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experiences in the Gulf.
Okay, my take on this is really comes from a completely different point of view, really. My story starts about 2010 when my first attempt at doing off-bottom culture was taking refrigerator racks and putting them underneath an old wharf that I had, 11 miles, and a camp that I had is about 11 miles away from the closest port in the middle of the marsh. And we just took some seed that we had, collected wild, threw it in some crawfish sacks, and put it on those racks. Somebody found them and they got stolen. So if you can't see your oysters, right now on my farm, I can see it from my couch. So if you can't see your oysters, they will get stolen. So I'm trying to present that that I'm doing nothing in my backyard and there's nothing to see here. Otherwise, it'll get taken. But as a general rule, like we live in Grand Isle. It's Louisiana's only inhabited barrier island. It's really the only beachfront that there is, and everyone on the island is pretty supportive of what we're doing. The rest of the coastline can't really be seen, and the threat comes from people seeing what you can do and stealing it.
So in putting this together, I tried to think about what region would be best to give their kind of shine their perspective on NIMBYism, because there's, even estuary to estuary or bay to bay, you get completely different socio-dynamic, different environmental conditions that lead to different reasons for why folks are a little bit hesitant for growth. But if there's anybody that has another experience from another region, if you're a grower or in any kind of field where you address members of the public that have hesitation to change or grow in the industry, it'd be great to hear from you.
I'm not getting that microphone back. Yeah.
So I'm Bob Rowe, I'm from Rhode Island. I had 600 letters of objection to my first application in 1989. The thing about social carrying capacity is it is fungible, it's changeable. You have the power to change the perception of agriculture in your neighborhood by being a good neighbor, by being a meat farmer, by doing the right thing. If you have an ugly farm and your farm's a mess and you're not a good neighbor and you're making a problem, you will crush your social carrying capacity in that community. But I was able to turn it around in my neighborhood, and after a few years, everybody came by and said, you're all right, I signed that petition, but give me some oysters, they're on their way, and we've got 70 farms producing 6 million oysters now.
Did you do anything specifically to cause that turnaround, or what do you think led to the change there?
Being a good neighbor, producing a good product, I'm making a mess in the watershed, always, helping out, but we're on the water, we're eyes on the water. I can't tell you how many dumbass voters we've rescued,
Yeah.
In Rhode Island, Secret, I think it is one of the few folks that have studied social care capacity.
not as good a study as you guys do.
Thank you.
And I just want to add, I want to emphasize Bob's point that social carrying capacity is something that we dramatically affect for good or bad. So I think Dave, you still here, was talking about clams and going to the bottom with gear because it's out of sight, out of mind. And I would just push back on that a little bit and say we should not give up good growing methods because some people look at them and think, I don't like that. We need to start thinking about how do we convince them that they go to Napa Valley and pay beaucoup bucks to drive through vineyards because they think they're gorgeous. But when they go by our oyster farms, they bitch because there's something in the water. And we need to think about how we change that perception. I don't think we should give up, because I think that's what we do with siting. We get the last site that somebody can be in. We take the last method that works. And I think that we just have to think about what method works for you to make money. And that may not be on the bottom. It may be, but it may not be. And we shouldn't give up just because people don't like seeing floating stuff in the water.
At some point, these farms become normal. My kids, when I first started doing this, my kids were little children. And now they're big children. And they drive past the farm, they don't even look at it. So do the other people in the neighborhood. They didn't pay attention to it. It was a curiosity years ago. So to them, it's just like driving by a pier or We never got with a vote on it. But they've already placed that in the norm. And Europe, for example, I saw a TV show, they were talking of one of those fix this house or show this house. They were in Spain and they were in the Netherlands. And they were shooting these $1 million homes, and in the backdrop were salmon pens. If there was any NIMBYism, that shot would not ever, that would be on the cutting floor. But in both scenes, both countries, those pens were perceived as normal. They were in the background, they were obviously what they were, but it was a normal, because they've been doing that for years. And they need the protein.
So I think,
Thank you. Scott, one of the reasons I set up the oyster farming down in Grand Isle where it is, because I knew that they were not, that those oysters weren't within sight of the stolen. Because Grand Isle basically began by Jean Lafitte's pirates starting up there, you know? And it's in their blood, so to speak. But also Grand Isle is a quaint fishing town. Okay, yeah, you've got Port Busan nearby with all that oil and gas stuff going on, but it's a shrimping town, and they get it. You know, it's just another way to make a buck. So my answer to my suggestion to all of you who are getting into this, as you choose your sites, you got to think about who your neighbors are, one way or the good and the bad part about it, and pick sites where, you know, that's where people are shrimpers can live in, and that's where, you know, that, well, there used to be fin fishing, but, you know, that's where this kind of activity is normal. They're used to seeing workboats out in the water coming and going, where they got shrimp nets hanging off or whatever. So you gotta, it takes a village, you know, I don't mean to be political, but it takes a village, basically, to pick a good site. And you're right, oysters go a long way for a lot of reasons, and you start visiting people and you give them oysters, and Navy Code, our neighbors look out for us. We never have a theft problem, but we're always visiting with them, and they come over and visit us when we're around, and it's just like Frank said, being a good neighbor. But picking your site ahead of time, you got to keep all this in mind. Who's going to be looking at it, and what are they going to do with it when you ain't there? So.
I mentioned this morning that our biggest current social issue in Virginia is NIMBYs. And I just want to give you a heads up of what's coming, okay? We have a law firm in Virginia right now that goes to HOAs, community associations, and says that we will represent you in opposition to these permit applications. And they do a real good job. So you have to be prepared, as you've already heard from these people, get your facts straight, and more importantly, get your supporters to come to the permit hearings, because these attorneys will bring a busload of people to the commission meeting when that permit application is being heard, and whether you like it or not, numbers count. And if you have 50 people in a room of 75 stand up and say, we oppose this application, there's a lot of pressure to deny that application. So heads up, it's coming.
And they can use the internet too. And everybody can find pictures of really sloppy oyster farms and gear washed up, and they'll bring those. So I think the burden is on you to have a farm that you can take people out and show that it doesn't look like that.
yeah, and like I said, the fortunate thing with the oyster industry is the science is in your favor. And so more exact and more transparent science showing images of actual oyster farms, I think, can help turn that tide. And using community forums appropriately, there's a right way to go about engaging the community. Talk with organizations like Sea Grant that can help with community facilitation. We have a couple videos, I think is it on the Oyster South website? Yeah, a couple videos that show oyster, especially oyster growing 101, one from the perspective of or maybe for the intended audience of a grower, and then one more for the intended audience of just the general public. That's a really good tool to use for just showing how it's done very objectively, and I think that type of material really